Hello, I am Eddie O'Sullivan, and this is This Week in the Italian Campaign. In This Week in the Italian Campaign, brought to you by the Freedom for Italy Second World War History Initiative, New Year's Eve in 1943 on the Italian front, with my special guest, David Marshall. But first, a roundup of events in Italy 80 years ago this week. On Christmas Day, 15th Army Group Commander General Harold Alexander sent a message to 5th Army Commander Mark Clark that Operation Shingle was to go ahead, and it was scheduled for the last week of January. Clark's insistence that the operation could only proceed if there was sufficient landing craft was to be the subject of debate at the highest Allied levels for 2 more weeks. On the 29th, in one of his first acts as Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe, General Eisenhower cabled an order to all Allied commanders, directing them to, as far as possible, avoid attacking the historic monuments of Italy. Today, we are fighting in a country which has contributed a great deal to our cultural inheritance. We are bound to respect those monuments so far as war allows. If we have to choose between destroying a famous building and sacrificing our own men, then our men's lives count infinitely more, and the buildings must go. But the choice is not always so clear-cut as that. In many cases, the monuments can be spared without any detriment to operational needs. On the 31st of December, General Oliver Leese took command of 8th Army to replace General Bernard Montgomery, who had been named on Christmas Day as commander of the British Army Group in Operation Overlord. That day, 5th Army Commander Mark Clark was in Sorrento for rest and recuperation after a severe cold. On New Year's Day, he replaced General George Patton as commander of the US 7th Army, which was then in Algeria, while he continued to command 5th Army. Later that evening, he was told that orders for him to leave 5th Army and command Operation Anvil, the invasion of southern France, had been reaffirmed. On the front line across Italy, the weather was terrible on New Year's Eve 1943. South of the Garigliano River on the west coast, Regimental Sergeant Major Jack Ward of the 56th Regiment of the Royal Artillery wrote in his diary, "Last day of the year, and it's raining like hell in the usual way." On the north side of the river, German medical officer Dr. Wilhelm Maus reflected on the dying year in a diary entry the same day. "It has been the most difficult one of this war for us so far. Thus, I once again salute the departing year 1943 and will now direct my gaze towards 1944, erect and with confidence." On the Adriatic front, a blizzard grounded Allied air forces. On New Year's Day, 2 men in 21 Indian Brigade died of exposure. In the high Apennines, overlooking the upper reaches of the River Sangro, Colour Sergeant Ted O'Sullivan of the 2nd Battalion of the London Irish Rifles had arrived 4 days earlier in the town of Montenero. The journey through the snow-capped mountains was picturesque but very cold. The companies were pushed out to positions high in the mountains at about 5,000 feet. Their shelters were mainly slit trenches and sangars. There were some small bivouac tents used for sleeping near to the positions held by the men, but all the rest of their comforts were carried on their backs. The snow was not yet deep, but the area was a white wilderness. On their winter journey to the front from Campobasso, the London Irish were joined by the 4th Troop of the 10th Inter-Allied Commando. The unit comprised Belgian soldiers commanded by Captain Georges Danloy, which had gone into action for the first time in Italy north of the Sangro on the 13th of December. They were to be under command of the London Irish until the 9th of January and used as a mobile reserve and for patrols into the mountains because of their training in winter warfare. 5 miles away, near to the town of Castel di Sangro, Royal Irish Fusiliers Acting Major Laurie Franklin Vale wrote to his wife Olive in the UK on New Year's Day. I spent December the 30th and New Year's Eve sitting on top of a mountain in the midst of a heavy snowfall. I have never seen so much snow. In places it was waist and chest deep, and what with an icy wind as well, conditions were far from pleasant. The 6th Inniskilling Fusiliers, known as the Skins, and the 3rd Battalion of 38 Irish Brigade had travelled on the 27th of December from Isernia in a heavy snowfall to the mountain town of Capracotta. It is more than 4,500 feet above sea level and has commanding views over the upper reaches of the River Sangro towards the Monte Greco Massif. Heavy snow on the night of the 29th of December produced drifts around Capracotta up to 12 feet deep. The following morning, a patrol was sent out to probe the Sangro Valley as far as the village of Castel del Giudice, 2 miles to the northwest. It comprised members of Skins Company A and was led by Acting Company Commander Captain Joseph Bagelin, 31. He was a volunteer from Dublin, where he had worked as an accountant before the war. Bagelin was one of the 7 surviving children of Anastasia Bagelin, a widow in 1939. Well over 6 foot tall, Bagelin was affectionately named Tiny. His patrol included Acting Sergeant David Marshall, also a volunteer, from Omagh in Northern Ireland. He originally tried to join the Royal Ulster Rifles, but had been assigned to the Skins earlier in 1943. Marshall was married to Lillian, a lady from North East England who he had met in Wales while training. Bagelin was a bachelor. The patrol descended from Capracotta on the road into the valley in another snowstorm. Suddenly there was a huge explosion. Sergeant Marshall had stepped on a mine on the side of the road and detonated it. He was instantly killed. Bagelin was caught in the blast, suffering what were to be fatal injuries to his legs. Stretcher bearers carried Bagelin back to the town, where the medical officer applied tourniquets. He was then put in a hospital sled and taken by ambulance to a hospital behind the lines. Bagelin had anxiously inquired about Sergeant Marshall and was reassured that he was all right, even though he was dead. Bagelin asked for his men to pray for him, that his mother should be told he had only been slightly injured, and his brother given the full story. He died of his wounds before he reached the hospital. Bagelin is buried in the River Sangro War Cemetery. Marshall is buried in the Moro River Canadian War Cemetery. I am now joined live from Omagh in Northern Ireland by David Marshall, nephew of Sergeant Marshall of the 6th Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, who will talk about the life and legacy of his uncle. Hello, David.
Yes, Eddie, how are you?
So you're joining us from Omagh. Great to see you.
Yep, lovely, bright, sunny afternoon, and compliments of the season to you.
I'm also joined by Richard O'Sullivan, who is co-producer, co-creator of the London Irish, of the Irish Brigade website. So he'll be joining us in this three-way conversation. But first of all, David, let's talk about your uncle, David. Can you give us some of his background and how he came to be in the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers in 1943?
Yes, Eddie. David was born 18th of November 1918. He was the eldest of 6 to James and Mary Marshall, just about 8 miles east of Omagh, here in Mid-Tyrone. David was a very accomplished carpenter, joiner. In fact, some of his work can still be seen on the family farm there, not least the farm chart that he fabricated before he joined up. So he was, yep, seemed to be a fairly natural leader of men as well. Um, due to partition and the troubles, as it was known in the early 20s, there was a special constabulary formed here in the six counties, and David, uh, aged 18, had joined the local sub-district or platoon of that special constabulary. That would have been 1936. But by 1939, he was a sergeant, section leader in that platoon. So, yep, he was a chap that was a natural leader and one that sought to do what he could for the well-being of the nation. He had such an interest in military things. Two of his uncles had served in the First World War. And interestingly, he and my father, David would have been 18, Daddy would have been 16 at the time, mounted their bicycles and rode to Clogher in June 1938 for none other reason to see the wedding of Major Beecham Butler to Miss Vera Stewart, the daughter of Major Stewart, MC of Clogher. So the reason I went to see that wedding, I knew it was going to be military dress and military code. So that's the sort of lad he was.
So he volunteered for the army, and he joined the Royal Ulster Rifles. He actually joined the Royal Ulster Rifles. Tell us a little bit about that period of your uncle's military career.
Yes, both David and my father Ernie were keen to join, but given the horrendous slaughter of the First World War, my grandparents decreed that no, there's only one of you going. So they let David go, and he went to the local depot, as we knew it, the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers depot here in Omagh, and he was signed into the 7th Battalion, a territorial battalion of the Royal Ulster Rifles. We've since learned that that was basically a battalion that fed men into the regular active service battalions, i.e. the London Irish Rifles, the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and the Fogs, the Irish Fusiliers. So we joined on 29th of September 1940. Was posted to Antrim Road in Belfast. And when we next pick up his location, it's through correspondence of the time. That's a letter 1943 back home to my grandmother. At that stage, he was in North Somercoats in Lincolnshire. Another letter here places him in Osselby Hall, Market Racing in Lincolnshire. A few months before that, he would seem to have attended battle training in Skegness. All this, of course, was in the build-up to being sent out on active service. A very fairly poignant and interesting telegram here, if it does show up on the camera, was dated 22nd of February 1943. It just simply reads, no, that's the one from arriving safely. Pardon me, this is the one I need. It just simply states, getting married today at 3 o'clock. See you on Thursday. Love, David. And that was handed into the post office at 2:45 on that same afternoon that he was getting married. He had met a young aircraft woman, Lillian Watson, as you previously mentioned. They got married, as I say, on the 22nd of February, 43. Sadly, this is a bit like Gillian Holmes' story. We just did not have the interest when we were younger to dig deeper and find out more. If due to this broadcast there's someone out there belonging to Lillian Watson whom we would believe has deceased by now, because if she was alive she'd be well over 100 years of age. If there's anyone out there belonging to a Lillian Watson, Marshall, from South Shields, please do get in touch. They were both over, as you can see. That was a Tuesday. They obviously both had leave granted, and they came home for their honeymoon on the Thursday of that week. And my father, who's now gone, also recalled that time when David and Lillian came home for that short spell of leave. Unfortunately, and probably that's due to correspondence then heading to his wife, I have nothing, no letters home from Italy at all. He was transferred, according to the records here, to the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers on the 11th of November. Entered the North Africa Theatre, as it was known at that stage, on the 13th of November 1943, and tragically, as you already pointed out, lasted just over a month on the active service front. He obviously fought in the Sangro Crossing, and the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers' contribution to the assault and the subsequent taking of San Vito, in which George Holmes lost his life. So he probably thought, having survived that, that was his baptism of fire. Brigadier Nelson Russell had previously said, and which was correct up to a point, but he had a brigade of battle-hardened veterans entering Italy. But George Holmes and David Marshall obviously weren't. As we say, he was quite wet behind the ears when they crossed the Sangro. This was his baptism of fire. And then when Irish Brigade were pulled out of the line just before Christmas, having reached the banks of the Morrow, they would probably thought, well, that's good to get that done with.
So the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, as one of the 3 battalions of the Irish Brigade, was then posted to the front line, but in the higher Apennines. So that's what you knew. That's more or less what your family knew about your uncle. But then you, more recently, you have discovered much more about David and the connections, particularly with Joe Begling. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, that's one that cuts the heart. A lot of people believe in luck. People talk about fate. I firmly believe in the providence of God. And it was God's providence that I had led a group on a battlefield tour to the commemoration of the centenary of the Battle of Messines, 1917. So this was 2017. We were waiting to board a coach, which was taking the group amongst other visitors down to the Peace Park. This was just outside Ypres, taking us down to the Peace Park, the scene for the commemoration ceremony there. This is, you couldn't make this up. The two chaps in front of us in the queue, we were obviously well dressed on that occasion, suits and ties, regimental ties, so forth. The gentleman directly in front of me had inadvertently put on a suit, and the collar was turned up. So a good friend of mine, Lewis Boyd, was standing beside me, and he just reached forward, fixed down the collar, and the gentleman politely, he turned round, and I suppose he felt somewhat at his neck, and Lewis explained, so thank you very much. So we boarded the coach, and as Providence would decree, we sat down in the coach, and the two gentlemen sat in front of us. Of course, Richard, who you now know as Richard O'Sullivan, turned round, recognised the Northern Ireland accent, and that started the conversation. He told me that his father had come through Italy, North Africa. I told him that my uncle David had come through Italy. Now, we're on a First World War battlefield occasion in this stage, but we're both then in Second World War mode, and I told him that David tragically had been killed. Richard said, when? I said, the 30th of December. Richard replied, the patrol. I said, yes, but I questioned that. How did you know about the patrol? And he said, well, Joe Beglin was killed in that patrol. I questioned that again. I said, who's Joe Beglin? And with that, he handed me a card, which I still have in my wallet, a business card, which is to do with your own website. And he said, I'll email you when I get home. I have something that would be of great interest to you. So a few days passed, sure enough, we swapped email addresses, and I received an email which contained a photograph of Captain Beglin, a framed copy of which sits alongside Uncle David's photograph on our mantelpiece, and a letter. I'll try and be as brief as I can here, not read out the whole letter, it might take up too much time. This letter came via Captain Beglin's great niece, a girl called Stephanie Hess. Maybe Richard, if he wished to fill in the blanks there. This was a letter dated on the 10th of February 1944 from Lieutenant John Stewart, writing home to his father. It begins, Dear Dad, a very good friend of mine was killed on the 31st. Well, it was actually the 30th, but we'll not split hairs on that. Of December 1943, is named Captain Beglin of A Company, the 6th Inniskillings. And he explains that I'm going to give you the details here because you'll not get that in official correspondence. It will just tell you killed in action. He's asking that his father would relay this information to Joe's parents, who lived in South Circular Road in Dublin. Gives a bit of background to Joe, that he worked for a firm of auditors in Dame Street. He believes it was a Mr. Walke's firm, and that the preparator is an old Inniskilling, which means that he was a former Inniskilling Fusilier himself. Anyway, Tiny, as he describes Joe, received severe leg injuries from a mine. And this next paragraph, I sat with tears quite literally run down my face as I read that the letter says the first thing he said after the injury was to inquire for a corporal who was also injured beside him. He was so anxious about the corporal that the stretcher bearers who came on the scene at once had to assure him that his corporal was all right. The next line says that the corporal actually had been killed at once, but Beglin thought so much of his men that the stretcher bearers did right in telling him not to worry. And as he was so badly injured, those about him expressed great concern, but he asked that no one should worry or take risks on his behalf. And then it goes on to explain the medical aid that he received, and then tragically he died en route to more specialist medical aid. 75 years.
Incredible story. Because you're named after your uncle, aren't you?
Yes, two of us are. There's a photograph here, 2019. Myself there to the right, my son Dwayne in the middle, and then the eldest of the cousins is to the left, James Gerard. He's David James.
Yeah.
I'm John David.
It's amazing.
We both were named after him, but because I had the family surname, I got the privilege of holding the name.
It's amazing, isn't it? 75 years, suddenly this new discovery of a new letter, an accidental meeting in Flanders. And then after that, of course, you've been quite involved. You came out when we were there in 2019 and you had the opportunity, I think for the first time, to go to your uncle's grave in the Morrow River Cemetery. Is that correct, David?
Yes, such a privilege. My mother and father had went out in 1983. That was the first family visit to David's grave. They went out in the early 90s again, along with my sister and her husband. I had purposely postponed visiting David's grave until our family was up a little. We joined yourself on that filming of one of the episodes of All My Brothers. And again, I postponed visiting David's grave. That was May 19, knowing that we would be taking a group out from Oma here, which would include my senior cousin. So I thought, right, we'll leave David's grave till then. But we did visit the map reference of where he was killed and originally buried, and that was poignant in itself. But all three of us were able to visit David's grave then in September of 19. And yeah, a lot of emotion.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I mean, I was there to share some of the emotion that you had about this opportunity, and we were delighted to be of assistance to you and your family. And it was great that your son was there. So we've gone down another generation to Dwayne, who joined you on this visit, so he can tell his grandchildren in due course. He's getting married next year, I hear. He'll be able to tell his own story. Now, looking to the future, David, have you got any further plans for visiting Italy or following the route of the Inniskillings and your uncle?
Well, look, when you're growing up, reading the Victor comic, Battle Picture Weekly, and The Warlord, that's the sort of comics were bought in our house. My father bought them to read them, and we read them too. He'd been reading war comics when he was in his 50s. I could still read one. All you ever heard about Italy was Casino. We've both been there, and the horrendous loss of life at taking that outcrop of mountain. So I understood for years that David was killed by a mine at Casino.
Oh.
How far away could you get at Capracotta? But there you are. Italy has a place in my heart now. And to follow the Italian campaign, we've had the privilege of joining you in our locations further north. But I would like, in the not too distant future, to take it chronologically. We have a sort of a nucleus of die-hard battlefield enthusiasts here in mid-Tyrone, and it'll be nice maybe in the not too distant future to start in Sicily and just work our way up. That connection, that Clogher connection, it's amazing to think that my father, David, went to Clogher to see Beecham Butler's wedding, and the two men were killed in the same campaign, buried in Italian ground. So to follow the campaign north, yeah, that'll be a plan, and hopefully we'll be able to put it into fruition.
Well, that's terrific, David. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Richard is now here. Anything to add, Richard? Your perspective on this?
Our meeting in 2017, he mentioned I was very polite to you in the queue. I'm not sure I was, but just to further illuminate what David said about the connections and why I did have David Marshall and Joe Beglin's story in my mind at the time, was that this letter I'd received from Stephanie Hess in about 2011. We'd set the website up in that period, and one of the first contacts was from Stephanie Hess, who's Joe Beglin's great niece, who sent this letter, Major Stewart's letter, that David's just quoted from. So I did have some exchange with Stephanie, and she was based in South Africa in 2011. So I had this conversation over email, and it was one of a number of contacts, and in a sense, I wasn't taking it more importantly than other stories, although it's obvious, a very, very human, important story that I could read about and know about. So when David leant across in the coach and we had this exchange of conversation about the Irish Brigade, it was in my mind very randomly, Joe Beglin, David Marshall. Oh yes, I remember that date, end of December 1943. And then when I got home, I sent the notes down to David, and David responded. And I immediately said, oh, it'd be nice to get back in touch with Stephanie Hess. I wonder where she is now, 6 years later, I think. And so I wrote down to the previous email address, returned, undelivered. And I thought, oh, that's a shame. But I'm not a stalker in normal life, but I went back onto Facebook and combed through a few contacts, Stephanie Hess, name Hess, and I got a photograph of someone, a lady with Hess's name, based in Dublin now. And I thought, oh, is that some connection? Is that some connection? And I dropped a direct message to this person on Facebook, which allowed me to do so, and asked the question, are you the same Hess family that I've been in contact previously? And got a positive response in that way. And then I handed it across to David. I said, do you mind, to the lady? I said, do you mind if we establish a contact between yourself, Joe Beglin's family, and David Marshall's family? And she agreed to this. And later, David actually, I think, went down to Dublin to meet with the family and had conversation. And it was by then, probably 18 or 2019 of that order. So that would have been 65 years after the event. No, hold on, 75 years after the events we've spoken about, reasserting this connection, in personal terms. And it was really, in a sense, I felt my job, if there is a job in this project, my job was done in that specific case. It was really, really moving for me to know that David had the opportunity follow up. And of course, since then, he's been with us in Italy twice. I think he's got the smallest kit bag I've ever seen. When we went to Florence or to Bologna area the last time, he was able to travel with, I don't know what weight, it must have been about 3 kilos. But he was a great companion. And just the last thing I'd say about the connection with Beecham Butler, as he remarks, that we, through this project of the Irish Brigade website, we've met up with Beecham Butler's son, Patrick, who lives in Castle Bar area. David has met with him a couple of times, and that historic connection to the wedding in 1938 is still resonant in our memory. And Patrick Butler is now over 80, as you know, as you could tell by the fact his father was killed in October 1943. I'm not sure whether Corporal Sergeant David Marshall did meet Beecham Butler in the training period in the United Kingdom. He wasn't in Italy when Beecham Butler was killed, so he arrived in Italy 2 weeks after Beecham Butler, Lieutenant Colonel Beecham Butler, was tragically killed. But those connections are just beyond, and what David's invoked about how it comes about, you do defer to that type of connection. What is going on? There must be more to this than just accident.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I am with David on this one. You do feel the hand of someone powerful, a great power driving you together and on this journey. Well, with that from me and everybody here this week in the Italian campaign, it's goodbye, good luck, and may God bless you all.